Okay, hello. My name is Michelle Kuhn. This is Angela Lee, and Christine Malk is sitting over there, who will join us later for her story. And we'd like to invite you to our afternoon of our first live stream regarding our Dülon parody project that we got a Canadian Council, Christine and I got a Canadian Council grant for, to do research into two classical era blind musicians, and we're very excited about that. And we're welcome everybody who's here today, and we thank Nadine for letting us use the lovely house, and we thank everybody for joining us online. We're going to start with one of the musicians. His name is Frederick Ludwig Dülon, one of his duets. The other musician we're looking at is Maria von Paradis, and you'll hear a little bit about her in the story, in Christine's story. But we're going to start with one of Dülon's duets, which is published right now, but I never heard of the guy before, and I've never heard of his duets. I've never heard anybody play them, so it's music that's not very well known at all right now, and hopefully we'll get it a little better known through our work on this project. So Angela and I will play this first duet. That was the third movement of his duet in G major. He wrote many more things that were lost, but we do know of 3 flute duets, 3 flute and viola duets, a flute concerto, and caprices that he wrote that were at least at one time published. So Chris is now going to tell us a wonderful story that she wrote, just to give you some context. Chris, come on over, but I'll get the chair up for you. Just a little bit further. Chris, this is the second story you've written, right, Chris?
It is. My interest in this project is as a storyteller and as a member of the blind community myself, to think about how our 2 musicians, Friedrich Ludwig Dülon and Maria Theresa von Paradis, fit into their world, thought about themselves and where they fit into their world. And so they were contemporaries, and we can research about them. We don't have evidence that they ever met, but I'm just going to assume that they did. Maybe they did, maybe they did. And so that's the fun of being a historical fiction story creator, is that you can take facts and extrapolate and imagine. So my story is called...
I'm sorry, I'm going to leave that, but I'm just going to just give the introduction there.
Oh, yes.
And that we have your story that we can put on the Facebook page. We can do that, and we'll do that, and maybe even on the blog, the podcast.
Yes,
so you can
yes. So this story is actually a prequel to that
Yeah.
one. So they're getting told out of sequence as they come to me, and as I learn more.
Yeah.
As we learn more.
As we learn, we're finding all sorts of things out there. It's interesting, right?
The parallels. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, he knew her, and she met. Oh, and they
Yes.
lived in the same city, so they must have known each other. So it's a lovely process of discovering and imagining.
Without any further ado, I'll leave it to you.
I'll
leave you to it. Something like that.
This story is called An Afternoon at the Cafe. And in Vienna, in the late 1700s, cafes were a popular place for people to meet, to discuss topics of the day, to encounter friends, to share gossip, and to drink coffee in a slow, leisurely way that maybe we don't quite, in North America at least, conduct ourselves quite in that way. And so this story is set in 1785 in Vienna, and it's called An Afternoon at the Cafe. Maria Theresa descended the staircase with extreme care. It was narrow, uneven, and steep. One hand was on the shoulder of her father, who walked in front of her. With the other, she balanced herself against the wall. She had worn shoes more sturdy than fashion dictated, but what good was fashion if you fell on your face or slipped on a pile of horse droppings in the street? Even sighted people found the stairs treacherous, and so she approached them with due respect. At the bottom, she relaxed and let her senses fill with the sounds and smells of the cafe. The astringent scent of coffee, the sweet pastries, the smell of damp wool, and many people gathered together in a space with indifferent ventilation. The sounds of dishes, cups, and spoons clattering, and most of all, the crosstalk of conversation. Maria Theresa was much more accustomed to small gatherings like salons in private homes, where there were fewer people, and most were known to her. But she enjoyed and was exhilarated by the idea of being around so many strangers. Her sister Caroline had been meant to accompany them, but was kept home by their ailing mother. Maria Theresa was sorry on Caroline's account, but glad on her own. She loved her sister dearly, but time apart was great, and it meant that she could spend more time listening to the conversation. They were guided to a table, and as they sat down, Maria Theresa, as she always did, firmed up her mental map of where she was in space. Behind her and to the left were the stairs they had descended from. Directly behind her was a table of men talking together. In front of her were some mixed small tables of people talking. To her left was a large table of men and women speaking. and to the right, there were also people talking cross-table, so it was difficult to tell who was there. Maria Theresa loved her city. She felt, and with reason, that it was the heart of politics, art, and religion for Europe. She loved the opportunity to listen to a slice of life that she didn't normally get to experience. They had just received their coffee when one of the small boys who acted as runners between tables clearing dishes approached their table and said to her father, "Herr von Paradis, there's a messenger upstairs. He wishes to speak to you about arrangements for your upcoming trip. He went to your home to seek you out and has followed you here. He asks, will you come up and speak with him?" Maria Theresa felt her father hesitate. "It's all right, father, go ahead," she said. "Oh, I don't know," he said. "Caroline is not here and I don't like to leave you alone." She was impatient, but tried to hide it. "Really, father, I'll be fine. Please go." He beckoned to one of the servers circulating with trays of pastries and said, "I must go upstairs to speak with a messenger. Please attend to my daughter and make sure she is attended to." Maria Theresa sighed inwardly. Her father refused to use the right words for things, and so strangers were often left confused. Was she perhaps simple-minded? Her blindness was not obvious at first glance, which in many cases was a social asset, but at moments like this created awkwardness. When her father had departed, she said to the server, "Please, I'll be fine. Go about your work," and made a fending gesture. The server departed, and Maria Theresa lifted the cup to her nose, inhaling the scent of coffee, which she always found both satisfying and stimulating at once. She listened with great avidity to the conversation around her. In front of her, people at the table were talking about new ideas that had come from France, about the age of reason. Since the death of the Empress Maria Theresa, for whom she herself had been named 5 years ago, there had been a great loosening of censorship, and people in Vienna now had access to new and exciting ideas from across Europe. To her left, people were talking about the increased presence of Protestants and Jews in Vienna. Under the Empress's rule, Jews and Protestants had been persecuted and sometimes even expelled. Maria Theresa had a great reverence for the Empress. In fact, the Empress was a figure in her own life more important than that of her mother. Maria Theresa's father had been a tax official under the Empress and still was under the Emperor Joseph II. Under the rule of the Empress, Herr von Paradis had supervised the taxation that had led to a shift of wealth from the nobles that had supported Maria Theresa's army, but had also improved the lives of her people. It had funded mandatory education for both boys and girls for 6 years of education in a public school system. The Empress had also built hospitals, even some focusing on the ailments of women. As the conversation flowed and she sipped her coffee, she became aware that at the table behind her, the men were talking about music, and her ears instantly perked up. "I heard him in Hanover," a man was saying. "He was a flutist of excellent skill. Herr Mozart, they were performing your Andante in C major, and there were several extraordinary things about the performance. The violinist dropped his bow during the performance, but the most notable thing was indeed the flute player. He was young and of great promise, and also blind, poor fellow." Maria Theresa was interested for several reasons. Who was this blind flutist? And Herr Mozart, her dear friend, behind her? A second man said, "How could a blind person play on stage? That is unseemly. He could not even see his musical cues." The familiar voice of Herr Mozart said, "Well, being able to see is not important for a musician. Any true musician does not need visual to see when his cues are. Is not music a thing of the ear and the soul?" "It is unseemly. How could he even get on stage?" the second man said quellingly. The first man said peacefully, Well, his father guided him onto the stage and guided him off the stage, and during his performance, he was excellent. I spoke with him afterwards. He's extremely friendly as well. His memory is legendary. He was introduced to the great master, Charles Philipp Emanuel Bach, who thought most highly of him. Now, Maria Theresa had a dilemma. She very much wanted to turn and engage herself in the conversation. She wanted to know who this flute player was, and if she didn't ask, she may never find out. On the other hand, she heard the voice of her sister Caroline admonishing her that she should behave decorously. The rules governing the behavior of women were stringent, but at least they were well understood by all. The rules governing her behavior as a person with a disability that was not obvious were more onerous and less obvious. As such arguments in her head often did, this one ended with, what would the Empress do? The Empress had been bold, decisive, confident. She had not achieved all that she had achieved by being timid. Maria Theresa turned in her chair. Herr Mozart, she said, I hope you don't mind me intruding into your conversation, but I heard your voice and I so longed to greet you. Fräulein von Paradis, he said openly and with warmth, what a pleasure to see you here. Well, here is one who can tell us about how a blind musician might comport herself. Fräulein von Paradis is an accomplished player at the piano and composer, and she has the voice of a songbird, and she also is blind. Maria Theresa began to regret her decision. Mozart's ebullient style of conversation she usually found very entertaining, but at moments like this, it could be awkward. Into the silence, she said boldly, I hope you don't mind, but I overheard that you were speaking of a flutist, and I wonder if I might know his name. The first man said in a friendly way, his name is Friedrich Ludwig Dülon. He is from Stendhal, a very personable young man, and I do swear we will see great things from him. He is an excellent performer. And where is your father? Mozart asked. He was called up to speak with a messenger, but he will be back shortly. Ah, Herr von Paradis, Mozart said in his friendly way, there is one who understands the value of art and of education for women, as you can attest to by the charming Fräulein von Paradis. The second man said, how could a blind person be educated? You can't even read. In her mind, Maria Theresa could hear her sister Caroline admonishing her to govern her facial expressions. She could feel that her irritation was showing. She thought of the patience of her father and her tutors who read to her endlessly, helping her memorize and learn, who made her maps and arithmetical tables that she could feel with her fingers. Had this man asked in a friendly and respectful way, she would have been proud to explain, but in this case, she didn't try to make her expression any more friendly. Oh, well, we don't want to talk about Latin or Greek, do we? Said Mozart placatingly. We would much rather talk about music. What are you working on now, Fräulein? I'm composing some Lieder, she said. But, Herr Mozart, I wonder, your Andante in C major, would it be possible for us to meet to work on a piano part for it? Perhaps this Dülon will come to Vienna someday, and it would be wonderful if we could all play it together. Mozart was very agreeable and said, oh yes, let us do that. The man who Maria Theresa had begun to think of as the oaf said rudely, and where did you say your father is, Fräulein? Speaking more loudly than politeness dictated, she said, he is upstairs speaking with a messenger. He will return shortly. Inwardly, she enjoyed reversing a tactic that was often used on her, speaking more loudly as though she had trouble hearing. She didn't mind being rude. He deserved it. Descending the stairs, Herr von Paradis looked around quickly for his daughter. When he saw her, chair turned, engaged in animated conversation with a group of men, he put his hand to his head and stopped in his tracks. The man behind him nearly ran into him and knocked him over. Muttering a hasty apology, Herr von Paradis rushed down the stairs and went to the table, but before he could rebuke her, Herr Mozart welcomed him. "Please sit with us. We were just chatting with your lovely daughter about the lieder she is composing." In the carriage on the way home, the rebuke was forthcoming. "Really, Maria Theresa, you must comport yourself with more dignity. You must remember to behave with decorum." Maria Theresa loved her father, and she said dutifully, "I know, Father, I am sorry. I know the way I act reflects on you. But really, Herr Mozart agreed that we could get together and work up my piano part for his Andante in C major." Herr von Paradis loved her truly, and he couldn't stay angry. He reached out a hand and rested it affectionately on her arm. Truly, he thought, he had named her well.
Thank you, Christine. That was very fun. I'm going to play a piece. Let me just grab one of these instead of all of these. Okay, so this is a solo caprice. The caprice is kind of like a fun little piece. And Dülon wrote 11 of them, and 3 of them were for 2 flutes. I've not seen caprices for 2 flutes before, but that's kind of cool. Angela and I will be working on those. We started them. We're going to play one later, and right after this. But this caprice, to find these caprices, they're no longer published. So I finally found them in an archive in a library in Denmark, and so they were able to send me the what do you call it, digital copies of it. And it was kind of interesting because I could tell it was handwritten. It was donated to them in 1902, which is like over 100 years ago, of course, now. And so it would have been published in the 1800s somewhere, and it was handwritten. And it's a little hard to read because they did some different things back then. For anybody who's a musician, if you had an octave G, 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 they'd put the lines in between, so it's kind of hard to read. So I redid them on my computer, so it's easier to read. And I found there's one that's really short. There's one like this, 3 pages long. There's a 2-page long one, and then there's this really short one. And I thought, well, I wonder why that's so short and everything. So I, wrote it out first because it was short. It was easy, and it wasn't as easy as it sounds though, actually, because it's built on to write out because it's built on chromatic scales. And anybody who knows what a chromatic scale is, it's every half step. And so anyway, so I kind of put it aside and played it a couple of times. And I thought, well, why is this one in there with all these other, really fast whatever ones? And because it only says minuetto, so it's not really fast. And I realized that the flute of the time did not have all the keys that our flutes have now, that our modern flutes have. This didn't happen until like the mid-1800s, just after Dülon was around. So he died in 1826, I want to say. So he would have had 3 keys on his flutes. And to do a chromatic scale like this, so a chromatic scale sounds like that, he would have had to do cross fingerings and cover the keys only halfway sometimes. So it would have been quite a trick to play a lot of chromatic scales at once. That's one reason it's not fast, and the other reason it's probably shorter because, chromatic scales, you can't do that much with them. So I thought it was really interesting, and I know that these caprices he would play as a encore or whatever, or if he was meeting somebody from the nobility the first time, something they didn't need accompaniment with. So it's for solo flute. So I'm going to play this caprice for you. It doesn't really have a name. It's just minuetto. music history, like in the classical era, after the classical era, chromatic scales were used, like the flutes were better, for example, or had more keys, they'd be really fast. So you could play this one really fast, but it wouldn't have the same charm, actually. I tried, so, to see what it would sound like. Anyway, Angela and I are going to play one of the caprices for 2 flutes for you. kind of the end of our performance part, but we would love if anybody has any questions for any of us. And maybe Chris, you could come back up here and sit down with us. And we would love to answer any questions about the music, or about the story, or about the era, or about the whatever.
Tell us about your tour coming up.
Well, we're going to be going to Vienna, and then Paris, and Innsbruck, and in between. And in Vienna, we have some very exciting things to do, like we're going to meet with a couple who play the glass harmonica, which is actually a series of glass bowls. It's not a harmonica at all like we think it is. And they've graciously allowed us to, are going to meet with us and show us all about that, because we found out, right Chris, that both of them had a connection with the glass harmonica, or somebody who played it, or whatever. In fact, you came across Mozart's piece. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so this instrument it's nominally said to have been invented by Benjamin Franklin. It's hard to know whether that's true, but it is true. So it's the glass harmonica, and it's a very unusual sound. It's very reminiscent of running your finger around the rim of a wine glass, but much more sophisticated. And Mozart became interested in this and composed a piece.
A piece of Adagio and Rondo.
Yeah, and so there was a blind woman who was well known for playing the glass harmonica, and so we just keep finding Mariana Kirschner. So we keep finding these overlaps as we research, like, oh, Dülon met this Pfeffel guy who writes fables, and he was blind, and then later someone put one of Pfeffel's fables into a song that he composed for Maria von Paradis, and so there's all of these overlaps that are extremely fun. Michelle, we keep texting each other at 11:39. Oh my God, I just found this. She knew him and he knew her, and they knew each other. And so we have a great itinerary in Vienna of venues where we know that they played, places where at least Maria von Paradis, because she lived there, would have been. And even some contemporary music venues that are of interest to me as a storyteller. Like if you're in Vienna and you want to hear music, where do you go? Where does someone go to hear music, either classical or non-classical? And Michelle, your interest is also archival, right? Because I just want to highlight, and maybe you can say a bit more about this, that like that piece you just played, when do you think anyone would ever heard that in their ear? Because it just exists on paper.
Well, I mean, when it first came out, the 1800s they had a lot of amateur musicians. It was a big thing, and it was really important to learn an instrument. So people would have played it back then, but this was donated in 1902, like I said. So it probably hadn't been played for a long time, so I would doubt that it's been played in the past 100 years.
I just think that's really cool. Right? You just heard music in your ear that has not been heard by other human ears for maybe 100 years or more. That's to me is thrilling, and also just for me as a blind person to think about blind musicians having a prominent role in their time and in their day, and they may not be remembered in the way that Mozart or Haydn are remembered, but Mozart and Haydn definitely knew them, and they all knew each other, and they played music together, literally in the same room, played music together. So who gets to be famous 200 years later and who doesn't is a fickle question.
I loved you putting Mozart in the cafe.
Well, he was right there. He was right there. They were friends. They truly were friends. And there's this great another Mariana Martins. She lived in a 4-level, like a triplex or something, where Haydn was on the top floor, she's on the middle floor, there's some member of the aristocracy on the main floor. So can you imagine the social life there? Like, I think about how some of our friends here in this very room get together on a semi-regular basis to play music, because that's just what we do, and that's what they were doing. In Mariana Martinez's apartment there. Haydn, Mozart, Maria Teresa von Paradis, they might have got together every second Tuesday to just play music together. So thinking about the big picture of their lives, but then bringing it down to the details of their day-to-day lives is really interesting for me.
And one of the cool, there's another question, but I was just continuing. One of the cool things is we're getting his, Dülon wrote an autobiography, which was kind of unusual back then, and to have a flute, and a blind flutist write an autobiography is quite fascinating. We're getting it translated. We're getting it translated. When went to the translator, she said, well, do you want just the gist of it translated, like what he's saying, or do you want it translated word for word? And we said, a word for word, please. So he's rather verbose, this Dülon, but it's very interesting, and we're just starting to get into the second volume, and it's fascinating. His views on things and how he describes stuff, and I learned a whole bunch of things, and just reading his autobiography, which has been really exciting.
And he traveled like crazy, traveling musician in the truest sense, and grueling travel. And he gives a ton of detail, which at the time his readers maybe found monotonous, but I'm fascinated. He's describing like, oh, don't go to the north of Germany, they have terrible beer, and the beds are lumpy and the roads are terrible. Stay in the south, that's where you get the good innkeepers. And yeah, the autobiography is compelling.
It is, and
really, really interesting.
He'll be even saying it that, oh, my readers will find this monotonous, so I won't go on. And I'm thinking, go on.
Go on, go on. It's almost as though he wrote it for people 200 years ago, because it's a real glimpse into the life of how, oh, you traveled by mail coach for, 16 hours to get to this.
And your sleigh fell over in the snow.
Right?
That's happened twice now.
Yeah, it's true. It's been happened twice.
Yeah.
There's lots of detail that's really interesting, especially as a storyteller.
I was just going to say, because the description of her going down the stairs and entering the cafe was so vivid. I was really moved by that. Yeah.
I think there is there not, Michelle, an actual cafe in Vienna that is still in existence, that existed back then?
Yes.
And I based it on that, because there is a basement restaurant today that is still in existence from.
And there's a basement restaurant, yeah. So they're two different things, but it's kind of cool that you did that.
Yeah, and just we have standards today. Like today we hold as an ideal, at least, we hold standards of accessibility and equality and inclusion, and those were barely new ideas back then. So the idea of having, let's make this staircase safe for everyone, that just wasn't really in the public mindset. So you hoped you had good guides, and you did your best with what you had.
Was Maria Theresa herself a traveling musician too?
Well, she did a big 3-year-long travel that took her to Paris, among all sorts of places between Vienna and Paris and back again. I can't remember. She was going to go to Russia, but she didn't, and I think she was going to go to London, and she didn't. I can't remember that one. Sorry about that.
Oh no, she did go to London.
She did go to London, right? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
There's somebody else I was thinking that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. She did go to London, so she traveled a lot in those 3 years, but she mostly stayed in Vienna the rest of the time.
And Vienna truly was Vienna or Paris, it's a tough one, but the center of art and culture.
Yeah.
So she could be very content to be in Vienna. One of the nicest sources is an article that was written for the Gentleman's Quarterly or something in the 1700s about her and her visit to London, and it describes her as some of the details I got about education came from that article, because it described how she had a great knowledge of geography and arithmetic and the basic sciences of the day, and she was truly well educated. And one of the things Michelle and I are really eager to research in Vienna and Paris is precursors of Braille, because both these musicians had a tactile language that was developed in collaboration between them and other academics, I believe they were, but they each had writing systems, tactile writing systems that were precursors to Braille, and we think some of that technology, some of that hardware still exists, particularly in Vienna, so we're hoping to get our hands on those.
Wow.
Are you performing when you're over there?
TBD. Possibly in Innsbruck. We're still sort of negotiating that. So not sure, but that would be thrilling.
That would be.
It would be. And the people we would meet.
You mentioned that the pieces that you played today were caprices, which are pieces that are no longer published.
Yeah, those ones are no longer published.
What are the implications of a piece being no longer published? How does that work?
Well, I mean, if you can find them like I did, they're under the public domain, so you can use them anything all you want, but you've got to find them. There's lots of music out there that's been lost. And there's a few pieces, there was one thing I read where he might have written up to like 80 duets, but there's only like 6 around that are still around. So that's a shame, but who knows, like in 2019, in somebody's attic they found some letters from Clara Schumann to one of her students' parents, you know, so you never know when they might find some interesting bit of information that somebody squirreled away somewhere.
What do you expect, Michelle? What are you looking for in archival research when we're there?
The second and third movements of Dülon's flute concerto. And there's some letters there and pictures and stuff, so it's a place called, okay, my German's really bad, Gesellschaft, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, for music, so it's Friends of Music Society, that was started by Beethoven's friend in 1812, and they have a huge archive of letters and books and music and all sorts of stuff, so we have an appointment there, which is very exciting, so that'll be really cool.
And I'm making contacts with, there's a blind fellow in Vienna who is connected with the School for the Blind there in the museum, so he has told me that they did, in collaboration with the School for the Blind in Paris, they did some research into Maria Theresa von Paradis, and so I'm hoping that while we're there, we'll be able to access some of what they did as well. So I think, so on YouTube, Michelle, there's maybe one or two Dülon pieces.
There's one Dülon piece, it's a viola and flute duet, and there's about 30 seconds of the concerto, just by the publisher on there, but that's it.
And von Paradis?
Yeah, well,
her fantasies.
So von Paradis, she's got two piano fantasies that are on there. She wrote more than that, but those are two that they know exist. And there's she wrote 5 operas, and there's one overture. It's called the overture, Der Schulkandidat, and I actually arranged that for flute orchestra. Maybe I should share that on our channel too. A couple of years ago, and that was really fun. But that's out there with a proper orchestra, not the flute orchestra, not proper, but with the actual instruments that she had written for. And the Sicilian that everybody thinks she wrote, that there must be 3,000 versions of it on YouTube, was not actually written by her. So.
And Mozart did write for her, did he?
Yes.
He wrote for her.
A piano concerto. Yeah, and Salieri wrote for her, and Haydn wrote for her. She was very well liked. Yeah.
And I think this is just rumor, but in the Magic Flute, in the opera The Magic Flute, one of his characters was maybe loosely based on Dülon?
Possibly. That's a thought put out there in a paper by John Rice, that Mozart met Dülon while he was writing the Magic Flute, and so there are parts of the Magic Flute where Tamino is like they put a thing over his head so he can't see, so he's blinded for part of the work he has to do to get through these stages of things to get to the end.
Yeah, to me the most fun part is all the connections. Is that they all had to know each other. If they didn't meet in person, they knew by reputation, and maybe they had vast volumes of letters back and forth that we just don't have.
And some of them we have them, some of them we don't. You're right.
And so.
But weirdly, a lot of them kept them though, right?
I hope. It's like archaeology, right? I feel we sort of feel like archaeologists, like we're digging up little new tidbits all the time.
Considering this music hasn't been heard in many years, you're saying like 100 years or so, or plus years. You know, it also makes me think about other music that's been lost or composers that we don't really hear about, and how that's maybe shaped instruments that are more dominant in our now. Because flute, obviously, he wrote for flute predominantly.
Yeah, because he was a flutist.
And other instruments, and like I don't know, it just makes me think about those kinds of things. And we think about the composers that we play all the time now. Mozart, Haydn, Bach, and all these. And all the ones that we don't hear. Anyways, I'm just thinking about all that. How did you hear about, or both of you, how did you come across Dülon?
Well, I guess I came across him first because I was doing some research about a talk, because I did give some music history talks about, I thought, well, what if I did a talk on virtuosic players in the Romantic era, because virtuosity became a big thing. And I thought, well, what flutists were virtuosic? I know, like, Boom and all these people, but which one was considered virtuosic? So I put that in Google search about 5 years ago, I think it was during the pandemic, and come up with this guy Dülon. I'm like, oh, he's not even romantic, he's a classical era. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've never heard of this guy, so I'm like, how interesting. Oh, he was blind, that's really interesting. And it just kind of went from there, and I did more research on him, and then I started thinking, well, were there other blind musicians? And von Paradis came up, and I gave a talk about that in the Curiosity Club, and then Chris said, well, I should write, what if they met? Write a story about that, you know? And then it just kind of snowballed from there, and here we are.
Yeah, and just the fact that he wrote an autobiography, I remember how excited we were when we found that out, because it's in old German, so it was not accessible to us immediately, but just the idea, he went to St. Petersburg. He lived in St. Petersburg, Russia for a couple of years, I think, as a court musician. And
Wow.
so every now and then I'll throw in these funny tidbits. He was in the last chapter, we're reading it chapter by chapter as we're getting it, and in the last chapter he was talking about what makes a good host city versus a non-good host city, and he was talking about sort of how frugal innkeepers and stuff could be, and he said, I've been colder in Germany than I was in Russia. So just throw in these hilarious little tidbits about what it's like to travel in Europe.
Yeah.
One of our research quests in Vienna, Michelle came to me with this, said, so the traveling, it was so grueling, and even if you were rich, the traveling was just grueling back in the day. It just sucked no matter how much money you had. What's the most gritty, grimy, terrible travel experience we could have in Europe? Let's do that. And so Michelle and I, unlike our traveling companions who will be on the civilized train, Michelle and I are taking a bus from Vienna to Paris. Yeah, 21 hours.
Yeah.
It's going to be gritty, grueling, grimy, but full of stories.
Yeah.
So I started calling it the mail coach in my mind, because that's how, if you were lucky, back in the 1700s, if you were lucky, you were on the mail coach, because it traveled quickly and it had priority, and the horses got changed. So now, we'll be on the mail coach. We'll live stream from the mail coach. Passing, we're on hour 19 now. It's late. But that's part of our research too. So I look forward to that with the enthusiasm of a researcher.
I'm not sure you're enthusiastic the first time I suggested.
I was not. I was not. I really was not. What you want? But no, I've really embraced it now. It's true. That's how you research. You live it.
Yeah.
And grimy. That's
Experiential research.
right. Immerse yourself.
Yeah. Immersive.
Immersive. Any other questions online or in the room?
Online can ask questions.
It's an observation. I really like her character as you portrayed her in the story. She comes across as just a wide awake, attentive, open person.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to project onto her, because I feel like I really relate to her, but when I read about how educated she was, she could not have achieved that level of education, without a lot of help and enthusiastic support from her tutors, but also just for having an open mind and a curious mind. So I'm extrapolating that she achieved that level of education because she wanted it, and because her mentor, her life mentor, the Empress Maria Theresa, valued education and thought that education just dignifies you as a person. And so, thank you for that. I'm hoping that I'm doing her justice in imagining what kind of person she was.
Do you know if she was named directly for the Empress?
She was, intentionally.
directly
She was
intentionally.
named. Her father chose that name because he was employed by the Empress, and that was something that you did. She was her godmother too, in fact.
No, actually, Joan, sorry.
She wasn't? Oh, okay. See, we're always learning
So
from
you
each
have
other.
to be careful on, we have to be careful on Google, right? Because like on the internet, because it says a lot of things. Like one of the things I looked up once, and it said that Dülon had gone to London twice, the second time 21 years after he died. So,
Okay.
so we have to, but she was baptized in the chapel at the palace, the Maria Theresa's palace. Yeah.
And the Empress did give her a lifetime pension, which was a pretty big deal. So during the Empress's lifetime, a certain amount of money came to Maria Theresa von Paradis, which is very unusual for a woman to have her own independent income.
Right.
So unfortunately that ended with the Empress's death, but still, you can see what a big figure she would have been in her life.
Are you going to write more on the Maria
Totally.
Theresa?
I got millions of ideas. A lot of them start with, it was a long day in the mail coach. People telling stories to each other. But absolutely, the characters are getting alive, more and more alive in my mind. So they're growing and starting to tell me about themselves. So there will be lots more. And especially, that's sort of the intention of so this grant is a research grant, and I mean, they don't even expect you to come up with any product of it. We've already produced way more than
Yeah.
the grant actually requires, and we haven't even traveled yet, but the grant pays for our travels, and
Yeah.
so
Thank
that's,
you, County Council.
yeah, thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, taxpayers, each one of you in this room.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the intention for me, one of my goals is to just be in the spaces where they were, and that will help me to understand who they were and to imagine stories of their lives.
We have a question from Glenn online. When is the trip to Europe?
March 16th to
Yep.
March 30th. Very
I'm
exciting.
coming back on the
25th.
26th.
26th. Yeah, so late March.
Yeah.
Late March. Very exciting. Coming soon.
But in Innsbruck, we're going to have breakfast at a hotel that Mozart stayed at. You can actually stay in the room he stayed at. It's terribly expensive. We're not going to do that, of course, but it's kind of fun. You can find almost any town. You can find something about these.
I bet there's signs everywhere. Mozart took a leak here. Sorry. Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
Well, they sell little chocolates called Mozart balls.
Yes.
Which is a little ironic, given his career as
He died very young too. I hadn't
Yeah.
known much about him either, and so young.
35, yeah.
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 So apparently, when he was alive, there were 40 professional chamber music quartets, I guess, in Salzburg alone.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
So
Amazing.
he had a market. Right?
Oh, yeah.
All this stuff was immediately put into the salons.
Well, and in reading the autobiography, like Dülon arrives with his dad in some little town in Germany, and there's the town orchestra, there's the town music director, and the violinist who accompanied was excellent, he's a tailor. And, or the military, the guy who's professional military is also an amazing violist. So you can just see through the autobiography how much more learned people were in music, and how the different role music plays. Music still plays a big role in most of our lives. We all listen, we all care, we all know, but to have the skill of the musician, have the training, was, I think, much more common and much more considered a part of popular education.
Well, interestingly enough, he does also mention that there are very good orchestras he plays with, excellent ones, especially with the court, associated with the court. But he does kind of bemoan the fact that some of those towns had rather
Terrible.
Yeah.
It's
Terrible.
true. He's
Yeah.
really unflinching.
yeah.
Just say yes. That's one of
I
the
was
things.
looking for a good word. Terrible words. Yeah. So
That's one of the ways he rates a town. Like,
Yes.
is it hospitable? Is it like, what's the accompaniment like? That's
Yeah.
high on his list, because he would go there and just fit himself into whatever the local music scene was, and be accompanied by the local orchestra or the local chamber music society. So yeah, much more prevalent than we experience it.
And when you were asking about the quartets or string quartets or whatever they were, the chamber ensembles, the classical era is really where the first era where musicians became kind of freelance, or became much more freelance. Before, they had to be associated with a court or something. They were servants essentially, and so they could publish their own works. Like Haydn could not publish his own works. He didn't own his own works until I don't know what year it was, and the Esterhazy family was, they loved him, and then one of the Nicholas maybe gave him the right to own his own music. So that's when that started. So that's why these things started up, because they could get the music, and people didn't have to just write what their bosses want. They could write what they wanted to write, compose what they wanted to compose. And like Haydn wrote 76 string quartets, because that was a big thing at that time. There were flute quartets too, which mean flute, violin, viola, and cello. Haydn wrote those, Mozart wrote those. Dülon and Paradis did not, unfortunately. That would be kind of fun. But yeah, to me, it's true. The classical era is kind of where music exploded into like the middle class and everyday life. There wasn't such a middle class. It kind of grew as the Industrial Revolution grew. Everything works together, right?
Is that why we saw like a growth in music during compared to like Baroque, or is it a little bit more in the box?
Sorry?
Like compared to Baroque, or is more in the box? Like during classical, you saw like the growth in music.
Yeah, there was a whole different mindset towards it, because it was more individualistic, right? If I can own
Be
my
more
own music,
creative with it.
yeah,
Still.
for various reasons. But yes, absolutely.
I just thought of one other musical question for you. Did they improvise?
Oh yeah.
So these pieces, which we have a score for, In performance, they might just say, okay, leave that part, just do what you want to do.
Not if there was a score for it. What would happen is you'd be given, let's say you were, let's say I was the empress of something or other, and you came and you were a pianist or whatever, and you know, I could say, well, here's a melody, like, you know, what can you do with it? And that's where you would do the improvisation. Once things were written down, you played what was written.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it was a different kind of thing. Like jazz is not like that, right?
Right.
They kind of had a guide and then they improvised around it. So improvisation was a separate thing from the...
So our two musicians in this story here, would they would have been familiar with improvisation?
Yep.
as well? And they must have done a lot of improvising just to get by in that society as blind musicians too.
Metaphorically, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. As we still do. As we still do.
They must have memorized the pieces that they played, right?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, Dülon was remarked, many people remarked on his memory.
Yes. Like he had the Quantz Concerto, which, believe me, is not an easy concerto. It's the one I'm thinking of, is a major, G major concerto. He had it memorized by the time he was like 9. I don't think I'd memorized it by the time I was 90.
True prodigies. It's amazing.
Yeah. So. No more questions? Okay, well, thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank
Applause
you.
for the audience. Thank you, everyone.